Well, 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 can we start talking about the future now, can we? Because today what I wanted to do was refer to a Twitter thread posted on the internet by Marc-Olivier Beaudoin. Pretty sure y'all are familiar with Beaudoin and the work that he does. He is a hockey blogger, he does stuff on different media platforms, and he went out there and made a post on Twitter about the Montreal Canadiens and their goaltending situation. Now, I think we're all sort of familiar with what's going on with the Habs at the moment. Sammy Montembeault is the number one guy. He's been good enough to be scouted onto Team Canada, which was already seen as a pretty interesting move because of the politics involved there. Oh yeah, they only took him because he's from Quebec. How ridiculous is that? But he is the number one in Montreal. Is he the best number one in the NHL? Meh, probably not, but he's certainly a lot better than the second option in Cayden Primeau. I'm sorry, but at this time I think it's time to admit that Cayden Primeau at 25 years old is more or less what he is. The .910 save percentage goaltender we had seen last year, that guy might not even exist anymore, unfortunately. But with all this in mind, I wanted to talk about the Canadiens and their goaltending because Beaudoin had this post, and of course it is all in French. So we're going to translate this into English and read the ideas within. On the situation of goaltenders in Montreal, Cayden Primeau will be an RFA at the end of the season, and if the trend continues, he will probably not be qualified. Jacob Fowler could make the jump to the pros, but he will definitely start in Laval, apart from maybe one game at the top end of the current season to burn a year of the contract if he does sign this year. Jacob Dobes will probably be left in Laval for one more season as well. The Montreal Canadiens would therefore be looking for an experienced auxiliary goaltender to assist Montembeault. And guess what? Jake Allen will be a free agent on July 1st, 2025. Honestly, he would be an interesting, low-cost solution. Here are some other options, though. Marc-Andre Fleury. He'll probably retire, but we can dream. Anton Forsberg, Mackenzie Blackwood, Dan Vladar, Charlie Lindgren, Alex Lyon, Kevin Lankinen, and so on. To be continued. I wanted to go out there and talk about two of these guys, because of course, you can tell from the train of thought that we are entertaining with this video commentary's title and thumbnail, we are talking about my three favorite teams, Vancouver, Montreal, and Detroit, and the idea as to whether or not Kevin Lankinen or Alex Lyon could be Montreal targets. Now, just to get things out of the way, if I wanted to go out there and talk about which fit would be the best, obviously, from a Canadian standpoint, Jake Allen would be the most fan-servicey thing that you could do, because him being a Canadian before, and the fact that he ended up getting traded away, and there was a situation there in New Jersey, and the Devils weren't really too confident with Allen because they ended up getting Jacob Markstrom too, and then they have this 1-2 of two guys that are actually pretty good. I mean, the Markstrom-Allen tandem has been one of the better ones this season. But to see Jake Allen return to Montreal, obviously that would be the most fan-servicey one of them all. I think a lot of Canadiens fans would like that just for the memes, and because Jake Allen was such a good sport with Montreal when he was the backup to Carey Price in the Stanley Cup Finals run. But other than that, if you wanted to talk about the guys that were written out as options on this list, Marc-Andre Fleury, Forsberg, Mackenzie Blackwood, Vladar, Lindgren, Lyon, Kevin Lankinen, I do think that Lyon and Lankinen would bring the most value comparative to everybody else. Now sure, you can say that for guys like Mackenzie Blackwood, for example, he's super good in fantasy hockey. If you have Mackenzie Blackwood, you're probably a fan of him. Why? Not necessarily because he wins a lot of games, but because he has to face a lot of shots, and the volume of traction, the activity that he gets, it's very high. So if you're in a league that prioritizes saves or save percentage even, there are some nights where Mackenzie Blackwood will show up and give you some good numbers. But that's not necessarily indicative of his own talent comparative to some of the other guys. If you wanted to talk about who I think is the most talented on this list, I really do, honestly, in my heart of hearts believe that that guy is Kevin Lankinen, who is the Vancouver Canucks' main goaltender of the season so far. I mean, he probably won't be anymore, considering Thatcher Demko is scheduled to potentially returning in a starter capacity by the very next game. But Kevin Lankinen started out the year as one of the top goalies in the National Hockey League. He was legitimately one of the top goaltenders in the National Hockey League in save percentage to open up the year, supported by a .935 to open things up, followed up by a .929 and then a shutout against the Philadelphia Flyers. He then had a .912 the game after that against Chicago. He then followed that up with a few more games here and there with 900s, 950s, 960s even, and then another shutout against the Boston Bruins on the road. Lankinen has been, in my opinion, the best goaltender out of the ones that Marc-Olivier Beaudoin goes out there and talks about. But the thing is, Kevin Lankinen is probably going to get a lot more than his current $875,000 contract for one season will see him make. There's no way he signs for that cheap next season, because for now, a lot of people around the NHL would be looking at Lankinen and saying, hey, this guy is legitimate starter material. He can carry the load. Vancouver has been working this guy into the ground because Artur Shilovs is trash, and Thatcher Demko is slowly but surely coming back to form. Lankinen had to hold down the fort while Demko recovered, and he did a fantastic job in doing so. The reason he was available on the free agent market for so long is because he wanted an opportunity, not necessarily the money. He didn't get that on this current contract. He wanted the chance to prove himself because the Nashville Predators last season, they didn't really give him that. He was playing behind Saros, and then the team signed Scott Wedgwood, and it was a very weird thing to see happen with that squad, considering they already had Lankinen in their organization and they didn't really use him, and then he went to free agency, etc., etc. So Lank didn't have much of a chance to do much with the Preds. Now he's in Vancouver, he's proving himself, and now he'll get a lot more money in the offseason next year. There's no way he signs for anything under, let's say, $2.5, maybe even $3 million a year. So the Montreal Canadiens, if they were to use a guy like Lankinen on their team, they would certainly need to guarantee him that he has that starter role on lock. Maybe even a 1A, 1B situation with Montembeault. Maybe he says, okay, I can prove myself, I can be better than this Montembeault guy, and I can win over the starting duty in Montreal over him. If the Habs have enough dollars and belief in this guy to do that, then of course I think it's a really great move. He's a fantastic goaltender. And that's not just me hyping up the Montreal-Vancouver connection because Tanner Pearson was such a good player for the Canadiens this previous season. But it's because I genuinely am a believer and a fan of Kevin Lankinen and his game. I could also say a lot of the same things about Alex Lyon in the Detroit Red Wings organization, because that guy, oh man, has this guy also shown off some very strong potential over the past year and a bit. He wasn't initially a Red Wings top goaltending prospect or a guy like that or anything. He was just a guy who was brought on by the Carolina Hurricanes and the Panthers, and then he found himself in Detroit, had a .904 save percentage last year in half the season, and a .911 save percentage this season in 9 games played. He has been great, and for the most part, I think a lot of Red Wings fans will say that talent-wise, the Red Wings actually do have a pretty good goaltending duo this year in Lyon and Talbot. The problem is they're both injured, and there also is the idea that the Red Wings defense just does not give these guys the best support most nights, so yeah, you could go out there and definitely say the Wings have their faults, but I think goaltending isn't one of them this year, at least when everybody is healthy, of course. So for Alex Lyon, a player who has really had to work himself up the totem pole, to a point now where he's 32 years old and finally starting to show off that he can be a 1A, 1B half the season kind of guy. If the Montreal Canadiens wanted to expand on that, maybe Lyon will be a little bit cheaper than a guy like Kevin Lankinen. I do understand that Lyon's numbers are technically better than Lank's right now, but just when you think about the role, when you think about the circumstances, and you think about the expectations, the fact that Lankinen was so cheap and he's doing as much as he's doing right now in Vancouver, plus the fact that he still was a starter caliber goaltender for a good chunk of the year so far, I think if that continues as the backup to Thatcher Demko, he will get himself an opportunity to get more money in free agency. For Detroit, I do think it's a little bit different considering the Red Wings don't have as much of an expectation as Vancouver does, so I think that reputation does play a part into it, although I would not be surprised if a team were to maybe think about selling a little bit more dough Alex Lyon's way in free agency, should of course he make it to free agency in the first place. I mean, if Alex Lyon leaves, you might be forced to keep Cam Talbot around for a little bit longer than just 2025, 2026, because that is when his contract will come to an end. but maybe it's going to be him with Husso, and then by the time Sebastian Costa is ready to make the jump, that's the time that Talbot's contract expires. Something like that makes sense to me. But either way, for Montreal, these guys would both be great. I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, which one you think would be better. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.